The old white farmhouse sat at the end of Maple Road, surrounded by towering oak trees and a garden that seemed to bloom no matter the season. To most people, it was just another aging house, but to 26-year-old Emma Parker, it was the heart of her family. Every important memory she had lived inside those walls. She learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. She celebrated birthdays in the dining room. She spent countless summer afternoons baking cookies in the kitchen with her grandmother, Rose. The house wasn't just a building, it was a living collection of family history. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Emma arrived for what she thought would be a normal family dinner. Grandma Rose greeted her at the door with her usual smile. "You're just in time, sweetheart," she said, pulling Emma into a hug. "I made your favorite apple pie." Emma laughed. "You always know how to get me here." Inside, the atmosphere felt strangely tense. Her parents sat unusually straight at the dining table, whispering to each other. Emma's father, Michael, kept checking his phone while her mother, Linda, avoided eye contact. Something felt wrong. Dinner passed with awkward small talk until Michael finally stood up and tapped his glass. "I have an announcement." Everyone looked at him. Rose smiled politely. "What is it?" Michael exchanged a glance with Linda before speaking. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to sell the house." For a moment, Emma thought she had heard him wrong. "The house?" she asked. "Yes," Linda replied casually. "The market is excellent right now." Rose blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "What house are you talking about?" Michael sighed as though explaining something obvious. "This house, Mom." Silence filled the room. Rose stared at her son. "But I live here." Emma felt her stomach tighten. Michael forced a smile. "We know, but maintaining a property this size isn't practical anymore." Linda nodded. "We've already looked at some retirement communities. They're very nice." Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Wait," she interrupted. "Did Grandma agree to this?" Neither parent answered immediately. Rose looked from one face to another. "No one asked me." The words hung heavily in the air. Emma watched her grandmother's hands tremble slightly on the table. For 60 years, Rose had cared for this home. She and Grandpa built their lives here. Every room carried memories of laughter, holidays, and family milestones. And now her own children were discussing selling it as if she weren't even present. "Mom," Michael said impatiently, "you can't stay here forever." Rose lowered her eyes. "I never said I wanted to leave." Linda folded her arms. "You need to think realistically." Emma felt anger rising inside her. Realistically, this wasn't about practicality. It sounded like they had already made the decision without Rose's consent. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. After everyone left, Emma stayed behind to help clean up. She found Rose sitting alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the garden. The strong woman, who had always seemed unshakable, suddenly looked fragile. "They've been talking about this for months," Rose admitted quietly. Emma sat beside her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rose smiled sadly. "I kept hoping they'd change their minds." Tears glistened in her eyes. Then she stood and walked toward an old wooden cabinet near the hallway. From the bottom drawer, she removed a small metal box. Inside were carefully organized documents. Rose handed Emma a folder. "What is this?" "Look at the name on the deed." Emma opened it and froze. The owner listed on the property was not Michael or Linda. It was Rose Parker. The house legally belonged to Grandma. Emma looked up in shock. "They don't own it." Rose slowly shook her head. "No." For the first time that evening, a spark appeared in her eyes. And at that moment, Emma realized her parents had made a very dangerous mistake. They were trying to sell a house that wasn't theirs. Emma barely slept that night. The image of her grandmother sitting alone in the kitchen haunted her. For years, Rose Parker had been the strongest person in the family. She had worked 2 jobs while raising her children, cared for her husband through a long illness, and somehow always found a way to help everyone around her. Yet now, her own children were treating her like an obstacle. The next morning, Emma drove back to Grandma Rose's house. She found her in the garden, carefully trimming rose bushes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Rose said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emma sat beside her. "Grandma, I keep thinking about what happened yesterday." Rose sighed. "So do I." Emma hesitated before asking the question that had been bothering her all night. "Do Mom and Dad know the house is still legally yours?" Rose nodded slowly. "They know." Emma stared at her. "They know." Rose looked down at the flowers. "Your grandfather and I made the decision years ago. We never transferred ownership. Michael wasn't happy when he found out, but he accepted it. Or at least I thought he did." That answer made Emma even more suspicious. If her parents knew they didn't own the house, why were they acting as though the sale was already guaranteed? She decided to find out. Over the next several days, Emma quietly began investigating. A friend who worked at a local real estate office agreed to help. What Emma discovered left her stunned. Her parents had already been meeting with developers for nearly 3 months. They had toured the property. They had discussed demolition plans. They had even received preliminary offers. Emma stared at the documents in disbelief. The old family home wasn't being sold to another family. It was scheduled to be torn down. Luxury apartments would be built in its place. The memories, the garden, the porch where Grandpa used to sit every evening, all of it would disappear. Emma's heart broke, but the worst discovery came a few days later. One evening, she stopped by her parents' house unannounced. As she approached the front door, she heard voices coming from the kitchen. The window was slightly open. Without meaning to, Emma overheard the conversation. "We're so close," Linda said. Michael laughed. "Once the sale goes through, all our financial problems disappear, and we'll finally get that beach property we've wanted." Emma felt sick. There was no mention of Grandma's future, no concern for where she would live, no discussion about her feelings. Only money. Then Michael said something that made Emma freeze. "As long as nobody finds out Mom never agreed to any of this, we'll be fine." Emma's pulse quickened. So they knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate plan. She quietly pulled out her phone and recorded the rest of the conversation. When she finally returned to Grandma's house, Rose was sitting on the porch swing. Emma showed her everything: the property documents, the developer's plans, the recording. Rose listened silently. With every piece of evidence, her expression grew sadder. When the recording ended, tears filled her eyes. "I can't believe this," she whispered. Emma sat beside her. "I'm sorry, Grandma." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Finally, Rose wiped away a tear. "I spent my whole life teaching my children about kindness." Emma gently squeezed her hand. "I know." Rose stared toward the house Grandpa had built with his own hands decades earlier. Then something changed. The sadness slowly disappeared from her face. In its place came determination. The same determination that had carried her through every hardship in her life. "If they want to make decisions without me," Rose said quietly, "then it's time they learned a lesson." Emma looked at her grandmother and smiled. For the first time since the announcement, hope returned, because Rose Parker wasn't giving up her home. And together, they were about to expose every lie. Over the next few weeks, Grandma Rose and Emma carefully prepared their response. They didn't argue with Michael or Linda. They didn't confront them. Instead, they waited. Rose knew that exposing the truth would require patience. Meanwhile, Michael and Linda continued acting as though everything was settled. They talked openly about future plans, discussed moving dates, and even visited retirement communities without consulting Rose. Each time Emma saw them, she became more frustrated. How could they treat their own mother this way? But Rose remained calm. The truth always finds its way into the light. She often said. Then one afternoon, she made an announcement that surprised everyone. She was hosting a large family reunion. The invitation went out to every relative she could contact. Children, grandchildren, cousins, aunts, uncles, and longtime family friends were all invited. Michael and Linda were delighted. "This is perfect," Linda told her husband. "Maybe she's finally accepted the move." Michael nodded. "I think so. She probably wants one last gathering before the house is sold." Emma nearly laughed when she heard that. They had no idea what was coming. The reunion took place on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. The old house was filled with life once again. Children ran through the yard. Relatives laughed on the porch. The smell of homemade food drifted through the air. For a few hours, it felt like the family gatherings Emma remembered from childhood. As evening approached, everyone gathered around the large dining room. More than 30 people filled the room. Rose sat quietly at the head of the table. Michael and Linda sat nearby, both looking unusually confident. Finally, Michael stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming." The room became quiet. "As many of you know, we've made the difficult decision to sell Mom's house." Several relatives nodded sympathetically. Michael continued, "It's time for Mom to enjoy a simpler life, and we've found a wonderful solution for everyone." Emma noticed Rose remain perfectly still. Then Michael smiled proudly. "We'll soon begin the next chapter." As he sat down, Rose slowly rose to her feet. The room immediately fell silent. At 82 years old, she still carried herself with remarkable dignity. She smiled warmly at the family. "Thank you all for being here." Everyone listened carefully. "This house has been part of our family for 6 decades. Several relatives nodded. "It holds memories of weddings, birthdays, holidays, and countless moments of love." Rose paused, "Which is why I was surprised to learn it was being sold." Confused murmurs spread through the room. Michael's smile began to fade. Rose reached beneath the table and pulled out a large folder. "I believe everyone deserves to know the truth." Emma stood and handed her grandmother several documents. Rose opened the folder. "The first thing everyone should know is that this property belongs entirely to me." Gasps echoed throughout the room. Michael immediately stood. "Mom, no," Rose said firmly. "It's my turn to speak." The room became completely silent. She held up the property deed. Several relatives leaned forward. The legal ownership was unmistakable. Rose Parker, not Michael, not Linda, Rose. Michael's face turned pale. Linda looked as though she might faint. Then Emma stepped forward with her phone. "I have something else everyone should hear." Before anyone could object, she pressed play. The recording filled the room. Michael's voice, Linda's voice, their discussion about money, their plans for a beach property, their admission that Rose had never agreed to the sale. Every word was crystal clear. When the recording ended, the silence was overwhelming. Relatives stared at Michael and Linda in disbelief. One cousin shook his head. An aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Family friend looked openly disgusted. Years of trust shattered in a matter of minutes. Rose looked around the room. Her voice remained calm, but her words carried more power than anyone expected. "I invited all of you here because family deserves honesty." No one disagreed. And for the first time, Michael and Linda realized that every lie they had told was finally exposed. The days following the family reunion were unlike anything Michael and Linda had expected. For years, they had enjoyed the respect of relatives, neighbors, and friends. But after the truth came out, that respect quickly disappeared. Family members who had once trusted them now kept their distance. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped arriving. Everywhere they went, people knew what had happened. The developer interested in the property canceled negotiations immediately after learning that Rose had never approved the sale. Any hope Michael and Linda had of making money from the house vanished overnight. For the first time, they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, life at Grandma Rose's house slowly returned to normal. The tension that had filled the home for months began to fade. Emma visited almost every day. Together, she and Rose worked in the garden, baked pies, and spent long afternoons talking on the porch swing. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Emma asked a question that had been on her mind. "Grandma, are you happy with how everything turned out?" Rose smiled thoughtfully. "I never wanted revenge, sweetheart." Emma looked surprised. "You didn't?" Rose shook her head. "No, I wanted the truth. There's a difference." Emma thought about that for a moment. Rose continued, "When people choose greed over love, life eventually reveals their mistakes. I didn't need to destroy your parents. Their own choices did that." Emma realized how right she was. The truth had been enough. A month later, Rose invited the family to the house once again. This time, the atmosphere was very different. Everyone arrived uncertain about why they had been called together. Even Michael and Linda attended, though they looked uncomfortable. After lunch, Rose stood in the living room, holding a stack of papers. "I have an announcement." The room immediately became quiet. Rose smiled. "I've spent a great deal of time thinking about the future of this house." Emma listened carefully. "This home represents generations of family history. I want to make sure it remains protected long after I'm gone." Several relatives exchanged curious glances. Rose handed copies of the documents to everyone. "I have created a family trust." A murmur spread through the room. The house can never be sold without the agreement of future family trustees. Many relatives smiled with relief. The house would remain part of the family. Then Rose revealed her final surprise. "I have also chosen the person who will oversee the trust." Emma suddenly felt nervous. Rose turned toward her. "Emma." The room erupted into smiles and applause. Emma's eyes widened. "Me?" Rose nodded. "You are the one person who stood beside me when nobody else did." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "You protected this family when it mattered most." Overcome with emotion, Emma hugged her grandmother tightly. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The room filled with applause once again. Across the room, Michael and Linda lowered their eyes. For the first time, they truly understood what they had almost lost. Months passed. The house remained standing. The garden flourished. Children played beneath the oak trees exactly as Emma once had. Slowly, Michael and Linda began trying to repair the damage they had caused. They apologized repeatedly to Rose and worked hard to rebuild trust. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. But Rose believed families could heal if people were willing to change. One summer evening, Emma and Rose sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance across the yard. The old farmhouse glowed warmly in the fading sunlight. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered. Rose smiled. "It always was." Emma looked at the house that had survived greed, betrayal, and heartbreak. In the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't taking something away. It was protecting what truly mattered: love, family, and the home that carried both through generations. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Emma knew one thing for certain. Grandma's house was finally safe, and so was the heart of the family.